Hi, it's Lisa, and this is the first of several videos using the keyword where to filter data. So here's a basic where example. If you start off with a basic select query with no filter, this is what you would get if you're searching or querying the mountain table. So there's 7 records here. But over here on the right, you can see I've added a where, and I'm asking it to show only the mountains that have a height in meters that is greater than 8,000 meters. So this is where you see only Mount Everest and K2 are coming up. So that's the idea behind where you're filtering data, whether it be by height in meters, by country, by name. So you can filter in many different ways. There are a number of operators that you'll see being used in a where statement. And you can see they range from these regular comparison operators that you would use in math, for example, such as greater than or equal to words that you use for operators such as or, between and, like, for example, for wildcards, etc. So in this video, we're going to go over some basic examples of where that use these operators here on the left, and then in future videos you'll see separate videos for some of these other operators on the right that use these keywords. So just to show you some examples, you'll see that there's a difference between filtering for values that are numbers versus, say, text. So if you're filtering for a number, like an ID in this case, you can see I just put a number 5. Whereas if I'm filtering for some text like Mexico, I'm going to put quotes around it. I need to do that. Similarly for dates, treat dates like text, so you'll need to put quotes around the date. Again, the equal sign is the way you would filter a single value. So if I want to look at category of ID number 5 or Mexico, but it could be that you want a number of records that are of a particular range, like I want to show all the prices less than or equal to 20. There are other operators too that you might forget about, but it's good not to forget about them, like the not. So for example, in this down here in this example, I'm looking for shippers. I'm looking for orders where the shipper ID is not equal to 2. So in other words, I want to show all of the orders for all of the shippers except the one that is ID number 2. The other thing to know too is that you could use these operators, but again, there are keywords that you can use as well. For example, here I'm doing the same thing. I'm using the word not. Now, not is the syntax is different. You can see the keyword not comes before shipper ID, and I use an equal sign. So again, in this video, we're going to look at some of these first basic filters where we're filtering out just a single number or a piece of text. In later videos, we'll look at some of those keywords like not. All right. To show these demos, I want to use W3 Schools. You can use any tutorial. They're all going to have the same kinds of information, but I want to show you that those operators that we just looked at map to these tutorials. So you can see in the table of contents there's where, but there's a number of different topics that really have to do with where, and they're going to be in a separate entry in the table of contents. So you can see here's where it will go over some basics. But then you've got this and, or, and not. It's really still showing the where. It's just showing you how to use those keywords and, or, and not. And then if I continue down, you can see here's like, which we'll look at. So that's another operator we'll look at in a later video, but same thing, we're using that where operator to use the like operator after that. So make sure that when you're looking through this list of operators and you want to practice each one of these, you look through the table of contents, not just of W3 Schools, but any book or tutorial that you're using, and you find the different entries for each of these different operators. All right, again, this video is going to look at these first comparison operators and single value operators, much like these examples, all of these examples except the not. So let's get started. If you're using W3 Schools, you can go, as you know, to any of these entries, and when you scroll down, you just look for those try it yourself demos. It doesn't matter which one. If I'm going here to where, there's an example here. They all go to the same place, and that is this database here. So here I've got the customers table, and I'm going to go ahead and run this. And the first thing I'm going to do is point out the number of records. So I don't have a where yet, but I want to be very familiar with the data so that I can make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So the first way to be familiar with the data is to know what the total number of records are. So the total number of records are 91, and when we use a where, we're obviously going to get a fraction of that. So if you were to get a number higher than 91, you should be worried, right, that there's a typo. So I know I have 91 total records, and what I'm going to do now is look for any record that comes from Mexico. I'm going to move this down to another line just so it's easier to read. I don't have to. And then I'm going to figure out which field I need for Mexico, and that would be country over here, right? So I'm going to say where country equals Mexico. But again, because it's text, I need to put the text value in quotes. And I'm going to go ahead and run this, and you can see now I've got 5 records. And there they all, of course, are the Mexico records. So I know that, to expect a subset, so this looks pretty good. All right, let me try another value. Instead of Mexico, this time I'm going to do USA. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. So now you can see I've got 13 records, all from the USA. Okay. One thing to be careful of is this. You want to be very familiar with the data. A lot of the mistakes that people make are not so much the syntax, the lack of understanding about how the code works, but it's a lack of familiarity with the data. For example, let's say that you came here and you didn't know that the database used USA. You might have come here and said, oh, let's look for United States, right? And when I look for United States and I run this, I get no results. And you may conclude that we have no customers in the United States because you did not know that in the database it was actually represented as USA, not United States. So you want to be familiar with the values that are used so that you can get accurate data. One way to be familiar with the data values is to do a distinct. So let's back up. And let's go to, I'm going to comment this out so that it doesn't run. And what I'm going to do is say, I'm not really sure what the spellings are of some of the country names, and I want to be positive that I have the right values to use for the country names. So what you can do is first do a select just on that country field, right? And then you can go and do a distinct, which we covered earlier in the quarter, and run that. And this will just show you each of the countries without all the repeats, right? So this is where you can say, oh, USA is, USA, not United States. So this can be very helpful to do when you're doing your initial research and making sure you're very familiar with the data. Okay. I'm going to go back to what I had before, which was the select all and the where statement, and again run this, and again just a reminder, make sure you are familiar with the values. All right, so I've done some text examples. I'm going to go and do some examples that are numeric. Let me go to orders just for fun to switch to a different table. And again, I'm going to move this over here. They don't add the semicolon here, but you can. Notice they also add the square brackets. Just a reminder, you can leave them on there. It's perfectly fine. You'll see that notation, or you can take them off. It's up to you. The other thing, too, of course, is you can use lowercase letters, or you can use uppercase letters. It's up to you. All right, I'm going to say where, and I'm going to say the customer ID equals 5. Because I'm using a number, I don't need to put it in quotes, and I'm going to go ahead and run this, and there we go. We have 3 records that are from customer number 5. So customer number 5 has clearly placed 3 orders. All right, now let's do a date. That's the order date field, so I'm going to say where, and you can copy from this too, right? So if I highlight this and do Control C, that's sometimes a good idea so you don't make a typo. and I'm going to say where order date is equal to, and this is another part of data familiarity. So notice that the years starts first. So it's year, month, and then day. And notice it's y. Did I say that right? Y, 4 Y's, dash mm dash dd as in year, and then 2-digit month, 2-digit date. So I'm going to look for those records in 1997 that were in January 1st. And I'll run this and see what I get. And I've got 2 records. Notice that I'm looking for dates, and I know I need to put quotes around those dates. Okay, let me switch to another table just for fun. I'm going to go to products, the products table. It's just fun to look at different types of data. So now for the products table, I've got prices, and I want to find out how many of these different products are priced less than $20, right? So I'm going to say where price is less than, and I'm not going to do equals to, I want it to be under 20, so not including 20. This would include, this would include 20, right? So I'm going to say less than 20. Okay, so how many products are less than 20? Again, really important to stop and say, how many records do I have total? Total, without any filters, I have 77, but once I filter it with this where, now I have 39. Now, if you want to go back and forth, here's a tip, right? So if you say, wait, I forgot how many products total there were, you can just comment this out temporarily, right? And then run this, and then you can see, oh, okay, now it's just going to run this part that's not commented out. So we know, oh, it's 77. And then you can uncomment this and run it to see the number of records where the price is less than 20. This saves you deleting lines of code that you will then have to re-enter. Okay, let's do one more, and we'll stay here in the products table. Sometimes what you want to do is say, it's easier to say, show me all the records except. So for example, and I'll write this here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, show me all of the products except those from supplier, number 2, supplier ID number 2. Okay, so what that means is I'm going to use not. So I'm going to say, show me all the products where, and this is the supplier ID column, right? So I can just copy this, where supplier ID, right, is not equal to the number 2. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to write not, and this is one of them using that operator, and we'll look at some others in a later video. All right, so just a reminder, let's run it. We're going to run it, and we have 73, okay? And if you say, well, wait, shoot, I forgot how many records there are, remember you can comment this out and run it, so now it'll just run the select all, and you can say, oh, okay, that makes sense. There's 77, but when I get rid of the products that come from supplier 2, okay, where the supplier ID is not equal to 2, right, then I get 73. So what that tells me is it must be that 4 of our different products come from supplier 2. And you might want to check that for fun, just to, I'm going to ask you to do a series of proofs with your data, but just to reassure yourself that yes, this is working correctly, let's do this. Let's say, okay, well, how many of these products come from supplier 2? And as we expected, it's 4, right? So the math adds up. So that's something that you're going to want to start doing. I mean, this is pretty simple. These are pretty simple statements here, but especially when we get into joins, and especially when we get into subqueries at the very end of the quarter, you're going to want to be very good about thinking up these proofs to prove to yourself that your results are accurate. Okay. So that concludes this tour of the basics of using where to filter data. We focused on these operators here on the left, and in later videos we're going to start looking at these other operators over here on the right and doing more complex statements that involve where. So that's it for this video.